Beneath the dust and rubble of an ancient battlefield, archaeologists made a discovery that turned history on its head. Not just swords and shields, but something far more unexpected: the remnants of a thriving marketplace. Picture this: a place where merchants once haggled over spices and silks, now lying silent under layers of earth, hidden for centuries beneath the scars of war. What was a bustling hub of commerce doing buried under a site of conflict? This isn't just a curious twist of fate, it's a clue, a window into how power really worked in the ancient world. Because when you dig deeper, you realize that battles weren't just fought with weapons. They were won with trade, with alliances forged over gold and goods. And this marketplace, it's the missing piece of the puzzle. Think about the last time you walked through a busy market: the chatter, the colors, the sense of life humming all around you. Now imagine that same energy, but centuries ago, in a place where empires clashed and fortunes were made or lost in the blink of an eye. This hidden marketplace wasn't just a random stop for travelers. It was a strategic stronghold, a place where the gears of power turned silently behind the scenes. The artifacts found here, coins from distant lands, fragments of exotic fabrics, even traces of food from far-off regions, tell a story that history books often overlook. They reveal a world where commerce and conquest were tangled together, where the real battles weren't just on the battlefield, but in the deals struck under the shadow of war. So why does this matter to us today? Because history isn't just about dates and dead kings. It's about understanding the forces that shaped our world, the hidden systems that decided who rose to power and who fell. This marketplace is a time capsule, showing us that power wasn't just about who had the strongest army, but who controlled the flow of wealth, who held the keys to trade routes that stretched across continents. As we peel back the layers of this discovery, we'll uncover how war and business were two sides of the same coin, and how the echoes of these ancient power struggles still resonate in the way our world works today. Get ready to see history in a whole new light, because what we're about to explore will change the way you think about the past, and maybe even the present. The archaeologists working at this battlefield site weren't just digging blindly, they were following whispers from history itself. Years of studying ancient texts had hinted that this wasn't just a place of conflict, but also a crossroads where people gathered, even in the shadow of war. When their ground-penetrating radar picked up unusual shapes beneath the soil, straight lines where nature doesn't usually draw them, they knew they'd found something extraordinary. Layer by layer, they uncovered not the chaos of battle, but the orderly remains of a marketplace, stone foundations of stalls, weights for measuring goods, even charred remnants of wooden carts that once carried treasures from distant lands. What made this discovery so astonishing was how untouched it seemed. Coins spilled from broken clay jars, as if the merchant had just stepped away moments before disaster struck. Scraps of fabric, preserved by sheer luck in the dry earth, still carried faint traces of dye-vibrant blues and reds that would have dazzled buyers centuries ago. And then there were the smaller, quieter finds: a child's toy buried in the dust, a cooking pot with the last meal still crusted inside. These weren't just artifacts, they were fragments of real lives, frozen in a single moment when war and commerce collided. But here's the real puzzle. Battlefields are places of destruction, yet this marketplace was carefully laid out, almost as if it belonged there. That's when the researchers realized this wasn't an accident. This was a deliberate choice. Armies didn't just pass through here, they depended on this hub. Soldiers needed food, weapons needed repairs, and someone had to supply it all. So who were these merchants who set up shop at the edge of danger? Were they locals braving the chaos, or travelers following the armies like shadows? The answer lies in the objects they left behind, each one a clue to a story we're only beginning to understand. The marketplace beneath the battlefield wasn't just a chaotic free-for-all, it was a carefully orchestrated dance of survival and opportunity. Picture a scene where a local farmer, his hands calloused from years of tilling war-torn soil, bartered sacks of grain for a handful of foreign coins. Nearby, a traveling merchant from hundreds of miles away unrolled bolts of fine silk, their colors still vibrant enough to catch the eye of a passing officer. Even in the shadow of conflict, commerce didn't just survive, it adapted, thrived, and in many ways dictated the rhythm of life. What's fascinating is the sheer diversity of those who traded here. This wasn't just a pit stop for soldiers stocking up on supplies. Fragments of ledgers and shipping records etched into clay tablets reveal a bustling network of sellers, blacksmiths repairing swords on demand, weavers trading cloth for protection, even healers offering remedies to the wounded. But perhaps the most unexpected players were the long-distance traders, their presence confirmed by coins minted in cities halfway across the known world. How did these merchants navigate war zones to bring their wares here? The answer lies in something far more powerful than luck. It was about connections. Behind every transaction was an unspoken web of alliances. Local rulers likely taxed the market, offering safe passage to merchants in exchange for a cut of their profits. Armies, despite their destructive power, depended on these traders for everything from fresh horses to forged armor. And the merchants, they weren't naive bystanders. They were shrewd operators who knew conflict could be profitable. Some may have even acted as informal spies, trading information along with goods, their loyalty swaying with the highest bidder. But the real surprise isn't just who traded here, it's what their presence tells us about power. Control over this marketplace meant control over resources, and that gave certain groups outsized influence. A general could win a battle with a strong army, but the ruler who controlled the flow of salt, iron, and grain. They could win the war without drawing a sword. The artifacts left behind seals stamped with official insignias, weights standardized to a king's decree hint at a hidden hierarchy, one where commerce and conquest were threads in the same tapestry. So why does this matter? Because it upends the old idea that ancient power was purely about brute force. The battlefield above may have been where clashes happened, but the marketplace below was where the real game was played. Every coin exchanged, every deal struck, was a move in a much larger strategy, one that shaped empires in ways we're only beginning to understand. And as we sift through these remnants of daily life, we're not just uncovering lost history. We're piecing together the hidden rules of a world where trade routes were as vital as fortresses, and where the right bargain could change the course of a war. The marketplace wasn't just a passive bystander to history. It was a chessboard where power was played out in subtle, calculated moves. Imagine a warlord standing at the edge of the bustling stalls, watching as merchants weighed silver against sacks of grain. That silver didn't just buy food, it bought loyalty. By controlling who traded here and on what terms, rulers could tighten their grip without ever drawing a sword. The weights and measures found at the site tell part of this story. Standardized bronze weights stamped with official seals weren't just tools for fairness. They were symbols of authority, a way to say, this is our law, our order, our profit. But power here wasn't just about brute control. It was also about opportunity. Some of the most revealing artifacts are the tax records fragments of clay tablets listing duties paid on everything from spices to slaves. These weren't random fees, they were carefully calibrated. Lower taxes for merchants bringing in weapons or armor kept armies supplied. Higher taxes on luxuries like perfumes or dyes. That was a way to drain wealth from rival factions, quietly strangling their resources while your own coffers grew. And then there were the exemptions. A handful of traders, those with the right connections, operated tax-free. Were they relatives of the ruling class, allies from distant cities? The clay doesn't lie. Favoritism was baked into the system. The real genius of this marketplace, though, was its dual role as both lifeline and weapon. Cut off an enemy's access to salt and their food spoiled. Deny them iron and their swords stayed broken. The battlefield above might have decided skirmishes, but the deals struck below decided wars. One pottery shard tells a particularly telling tale, a hastily scribbled note about a shipment of grain redirected to a general's camp. Was this theft or strategy? Likely both, because in the end, the marketplace wasn't just a place to trade goods. It was a place to trade power and the artifacts left behind. The coins, the seals, the broken contracts are the receipts of those invisible battles. So who really controlled this hub? The answer isn't simple. Sometimes it was the local ruler taxing every transaction. Other times it was the merchants themselves playing rival factions against each other to secure the best deals. And occasionally it was the soldiers whose demands for supplies could bend the market to their will. But one thing's clear, this wasn't a free market in any modern sense. It was a stage where every exchange had a hidden cost, every deal a shadow agenda. The next time you hear about an ancient battle, remember, the real fight might have happened not with clashing swords, but with whispered negotiations over a merchant's scales. The coins unearthed from this buried marketplace aren't just metal, they're miniature history books. Each one tells us who held power, when, and how far their influence reached. A bronze coin stamped with the profile of a distant emperor, found nestled between the stones of a collapsed stall, whispers of trade routes stretching hundreds of miles. Another, crudely minted by a local warlord, shows how quickly authority could change hands. But the real surprise, coins from rival factions, jumbled together in the same purse. Enemies might have clashed on the battlefield, but in the marketplace their money spent the same. Weapons recovered from the site reveal an even darker symbiosis between trade and war. A dagger with a blade forged from foreign steel, its hilt inlaid with lapis lazuli from mountains halfway across the known world, proves that conflict drove demand for luxury as much as necessity. Arrowheads piled near a blacksmith stall, still waiting to be fitted to shafts, hint at an industry thriving on constant demand. Yet among these instruments of war, there are quieter finds: a cooking knife with a handle worn smooth by years of use, a sickle blade still caked with ancient wheat chaff. War might have defined the era, but life stubbornly persisted. Then there are the everyday objects, the ones that make history feel human. A child's clay whistle, carved in the shape of a bird, fell between the cracks of a merchant's stall and waited centuries to be found. A pottery jug, its rim carefully repaired with lead clamps, speaks of scarcity and the value of making do. But perhaps most telling is the broken ledger tablet, its surface etched with rows of tiny, precise markings. One line lists 20 measures of barley paid in silver. Another, crossed out hastily, reads, "Ode to the garrison." These aren't just inventory lists, they're proof of an economy operating under the strain of war, where every transaction balanced survival against profit. Some artifacts carry symbols that defy simple explanations. A merchant's seal ring bears the insignia of two rival cities, as if its owner played both sides. A scrap of parchment, preserved by miracle, records a deal brokered in 3 languages. These aren't just random finds, they're evidence of a world where loyalties were as fluid as the goods being traded. And that's what makes this marketplace so extraordinary. It wasn't just a place where things were bought and sold. It was a crossroads where cultures collided, where the rules of war bent beneath the weight of human need. So what does all this tell us about the people who passed through here? The soldier who tucked a love letter into his belt pouch next to his last few coins. The merchant who risked bandits and battle lines to bring spices to a war zone. The farmer's wife who traded her last jar of honey for a scrap of cloth to sew a child's tunic. Their stories don't live in grand monuments or royal decrees. They're written in the scratches on a weighing scale, the soot on a lamp, the seeds trapped in the cracks of a grinding stone. These artifacts don't just show us how people survived, they show us why survival mattered. Ancient soldiers didn't march on courage alone. They marched on bread, on salt, on the steady supply of arrows and armor that kept them alive. Scrolls recovered from near the battlefield describe desperate pleas from officers to merchants. Send grain or the men will desert. One crumbling ledger lists the going rate for a loaf of bread during a siege, 10 times its normal price paid in blood-stained silver. Yet these same texts also reveal moments of unexpected humanity. A trader's diary tells of sharing wine with enemy soldiers on a cold night, both sides weary of war, laughing over stories of home. Another records how a blacksmith repaired a rival faction's swords, not for profit, but because his son had been conscripted into their ranks. For every act of cooperation, though, there was exploitation. Inscriptions on clay tablets accuse merchants of hoarding grain to drive up prices, knowing armies would pay anything to feed their troops. A soldier's letter home complains of boots that fell apart after a week, sewn with rotten thread by a trader who vanished with his coin. Yet even amid the distrust, the market endured. Why? Because war, for all its chaos, followed ruthless logic. Soldiers needed suppliers, and suppliers needed protection. It was an uneasy dance, but one neither side could afford to quit. The real surprise lies in how these markets became unofficial peace zones. Archaeologists found a set of rules carved into a stone slab at the marketplace's edge. No weapons drawn, no debts collected by force, disputes settled by neutral elders. This wasn't idealism, it was practicality. Kill the merchants and armies starved, rob the soldiers and merchants lost their best customers. So enemies traded under truce, their hatred paused long enough to barter. A fragment of poetry scratched onto a broken cup captures the absurdity. We break bread with the men we'll bury tomorrow. But the marketplace's true power wasn't just in feeding armies, it was in shaping them. Coins minted by warlords found their way into traders' hands, spreading the ruler's image far beyond his territory. Luxuries like spices and silks sold to officers became status symbols that reinforced hierarchy. Even the act of setting prices was political. When a general fixed the cost of armor, he didn't just control supplies, he signaled who held real power. So who really kept this system running? Not kings or generals, but the lowly porters, the mule drivers who knew secret paths through contested land, the scribes who recorded deals in code. Their names are lost, but their legacy isn't. Every scorched bean left in a cooking pot, every worn-down coin, tells a story of ordinary people navigating an impossible world. And that's the untold truth of this marketplace. It wasn't just a stage for history's giants. It was a lifeline strung between them, held together by the hands of those history forgot. War reshaped economies as violently as it did landscapes, and this marketplace was ground zero for that transformation. Picture a warlord's quartermaster haggling over the price of iron ingots while, just beyond the market's edge, soldiers sharpened swords made from the same metal. Every transaction here was a silent battle not for territory, but for control over the lifeblood of war itself. Food, weapons, even the leather for boots and saddles had to move through hubs like this, making merchants the unseen generals of any campaign. The real power wasn't just in who held the high ground on the battlefield, but who held the ledger books. Take something as simple as salt. Armies needed it to preserve food, treat wounds, and even pay soldiers when coin ran low. Control the salt trade, and you could strangle an enemy's supply lines without ever drawing a blade. Archaeologists found evidence of this in the marketplace's ruins, sealed clay jars stamped with official seals, their contents taxed at double the usual rate during sieges. But salt was just one piece of the puzzle. Timber for siege engines, charcoal for blacksmiths' forges, even honey for disinfecting wounds all flowed through these networks, each with its own shadow economy. A scrap of parchment lists a shipment of arrows lost in transit to a rival faction, only for identical arrows to appear days later in the hands of mercenaries. Coincidence unlikely. The aftermath of war revealed the marketplace's darkest irony. When peace finally came, the very merchants who'd profited from conflict often pivoted to profiting from rebuilding. A trader who'd sold spearheads one season might peddle plowshares the next, melting down swords into tools. But not everyone benefited. Coins from the site tell a grim tale. After major battles, the currency shifted dramatically, with older coins, those held by common soldiers and locals, disappearing, replaced by freshly minted coins bearing the victor's face. This wasn't just symbolism, it was economic conquest. The winners didn't just take land, they rewrote the rules of trade, ensuring their wealth endured long after the fighting stopped. Yet the marketplace's true legacy lies in its fragility. Layers of ash in the soil show it was burned repeatedly, not by invaders but by retreating armies denying resources to their pursuers. A crushed merchant scale, its weight still stacked neatly, was found beneath a collapsed wall abandoned mid-deal as if time itself had frozen. These weren't accidents. They were deliberate acts of economic warfare, proving that the marketplace was never just a place of commerce. It was a weapon, a prize, and ultimately, a casualty in the endless cycle of conflict and control. And in its ruins, we see the brutal truth. War wasn't just waged with steel. It was waged with silver, with salt, with every sack of grain that crossed the market's threshold. The battlefield above might have decided who ruled, but the marketplace below decided for how long. When the dust settled and the last soldiers marched away, this marketplace faced a crossroads, one that reveals as much about ancient power as its wartime hustle did. Some trading hubs, once the war ended, simply withered. Without armies to supply, merchants moved on, leaving empty stalls to the wind. Others transformed, their temporary stalls hardening into permanent shops, their war-driven economy shifting to serve peacetime needs. But this marketplace, it didn't fade or adapt. It was buried deliberately. Layers of ash tell part of the story, not the gradual buildup of daily life, but thick, concentrated bands, as if flames had roared through in a single, devastating sweep. Mixed in are chunks of collapsed stone walls, their edges scorched, suggesting this wasn't just an accident. Someone wanted this place gone, but why? The answer might lie in what was left behind. A set of merchant seals stamped with the insignia of a defeated faction were found crushed beneath a toppled column. Nearby, a cache of coins from a toppled dynasty had been hastily hidden, never reclaimed. This wasn't just cleanup after a battle, it was a purge. The victors weren't just erasing an enemy, they were erasing the proof that trade with that enemy had ever existed. Compare this to other hidden markets and a pattern emerges. In one distant region, archaeologists found a similar marketplace sealed beneath a layer of packed earth, its entrance blocked by stones bearing the new ruler's symbol. In another, a well was filled with broken merchant tablets, their records of wartime deals deliberately shattered. These weren't random acts of destruction. They were calculated strikes against memory itself, because in the ancient world, commerce wasn't just business, it was legitimacy. A marketplace that had fed and armed your rivals was evidence that their power had once been real, their alliances viable. Erase it and you rewrite history, yet there's a twist. The very act of burying this marketplace preserved it like no library ever could. The ash that sealed it starved the site of oxygen, slowing decay. The collapsed walls shielded fragile artifacts from looters and time. Even the hurried abandonment left snapshots of daily life frozen mid-moment, a half-woven basket, a meal half-eaten, a ledger open to a page of debts that would never be paid. These aren't just relics, they're rebuttals. However hard the victors tried to scrub this place from memory, the earth kept its secrets. So what does this say about the people who destroyed it? That their grip on power was fragile enough to fear a ghost market. That control for them meant controlling not just the future but the past, and perhaps most tellingly that they failed. Because now, centuries later, the stalls are speaking again, not in the voices of kings or generals, but in the quiet clutter of ordinary lives that refused to disappear. Similar marketplaces lie hidden beneath battlefields across the ancient world, each telling its own version of the same story, that trade and war were never truly separate. Near the ruins of Rome's frontier forts, archaeologists uncovered rows of sunken stalls where soldiers once spent their wages on wine and trinkets, just a stone's throw from where they fought. Along the Silk Road, caravanserais doubled as spy posts, their merchants passing coded messages in the folds of traded silks. And in the sands of Egypt, a market near a pharaoh's military outpost held fragments of letters between generals and grain suppliers, their deals sealed with seals that bore both royal insignias and merchant marks. What's striking isn't just their existence, it's their sameness. From Britain to Persia, these markets followed an unspoken blueprint. They clustered near garrison gates or crossroads, places where armies and civilians inevitably mixed. They traded in the same essentials: salt for preserving rations, leather for armor repairs, sour wine to dull the ache of wounds. Even their ruins share eerie similarities: scorched timbers from hasty burnings, coins jammed into cracks by fleeing traders, the skeletons of pack animals left where they collapsed under heavy loads. These weren't random outposts, they were the nervous system of ancient warfare, pulsing with goods and gossip that kept empires alive. Yet among these global echoes, our battlefield marketplace stands apart. Not for its size or location, but for the whispers of its ordinary people. A child's wooden doll, carved with clumsy love, was found tucked beneath a toppled stall, a touch of tenderness in a place of brutality. A scribe's tablet, hastily scratched with a plea for repayment, mentions a debt owed when the fighting ends. Most telling, a hoard of lentils spilled and trampled, their seeds preserved in the mud. Lentils weren't army rations, they were peasant food, proof that locals still came here, war or not, to barter for their suppers. This marketplace's real secret isn't in the grand strategy of kings, but in the stubbornness of daily life. While others served purely as military supply chains, this one never stopped being a place where farmers haggled, lovers exchanged trinkets, and children played between the swords. That's why its artifacts matter more than any battlefield trophy. They remind us that even in the shadow of war, people refused to let go of the rhythms that made them human. And that's a pattern no conqueror could ever fully erase. Among the shattered pottery and scattered coins, archaeologists uncovered artifacts that didn't fit the usual marketplace inventory. Tiny clay figurines of foreign deities tucked beneath floor stones, fragments of wax tablets etched with coded symbols, even delicate scrolls sealed with ribbons, their ink still faintly legible after centuries. One, found curled inside a hollowed-out olive jar, began with the words, "My love, I count the days until the smoke clears." At first glance, these seem like personal treasures, lost or hidden in the chaos of war. But when you line them up, a curious pattern emerges. These weren't random keepsakes, they were tools. Take the religious figurines. At first, they appeared to be simple devotional objects, perhaps carried by traveling merchants for protection. But when researchers mapped where they were found, something strange surfaced. They clustered near the marketplace's edges, close to routes leading to rival territories. Coincidence, maybe, until you consider the historical record. Spy networks in the ancient world often used religious symbols as identifiers, a way to signal safe passage or mark meeting points. A small statue of a harvest goddess might seem innocent, but placed at the foot of a specific stall, it could whisper, "Speak to the weaver for news of the north." Then there are the encrypted messages. Most were scratched onto wax or shards of pottery, their symbols a mix of local script and unfamiliar markings. One, deciphered after months of study, turned out to be a merchant's ledger, except the numbers didn't match any known weights or measures. Historians now suspect these were disguised supply lists, recording everything from weapons cached in nearby caves to the going rate for bribing border guards. But the most tantalizing find, a scrap of parchment listing names alongside sums of silver, each entry marked with a tiny dagger symbol. Was this a payroll for mercenaries or a kill list? The truth might be both, and what of the love letters, too intimate to be mere code, yet too carefully hidden to be casual notes? One, penned on fragile bark paper, spoke of a promised reunion when the walls fall. Another, tucked into a soldier's belt buckle, begged its recipient to remember the olive grove at dusk. Were these genuine tokens of affection or covers for deeper secrets? In an era when couriers were searched and letters read aloud, romance made for perfect camouflage. A sweet nothing might hide troop movements, a whispered endearment could mask a warning. But here's the twist, not every artifact fits the spy theory. A child's bracelet woven from horsehair, a lock of braided hair tied with a faded ribbon, a single worn-out sandal too small to belong to a grown adult. These speak of something simpler, people clinging to fragments of normalcy amid the upheaval of war. Maybe that's the real mystery. This marketplace wasn't just a hub for trade or espionage. It was a place where lives collided, where spies and soldiers, lovers and refugees all passed through, leaving behind traces of their hopes, their schemes, and their quiet, unremarkable humanity. To understand these objects, we need to step back and ask, what does survival look like in the shadow of war? It's not just about food or weapons. It's about the symbols that promise protection, the coded words that offer escape, the letters that keep a fragile thread of connection alive. These artifacts aren't just clues to a hidden history. They're reminders that even in the darkest times, people found ways to resist, to remember, and to reach for something beyond the battlefield. And that's a story no conqueror could ever bury. To understand this marketplace's true role, we need to peel back the layers of ancient law and shadow economies. Official trade in empires like Rome was strictly regulated, taxes collected, goods inspected, and routes patrolled. Yet here, beneath a battlefield, we find a hub that seems to operate outside those rules. The absence of tax seals on certain goods suggests some merchants were flying under the radar. But was this outright rebellion or something more nuanced? The answer might lie in how power worked at the edges of empires. Consider the Roman Portoria customs taxes so burdensome that traders often sought backdoor routes. Ancient records speak of governors turning a blind eye to smuggling in exchange for bribes. creating a grey market where deals flourished just beyond official scrutiny. Persia's royal roads, though legendary for their security, had hidden byways where merchants dodged tolls. This marketplace, nestled where armies clashed, may have thrived on similar contradictions. A bronze weight found here, stamped with two conflicting measurement standards, hints at a place playing both sides, serving the powerful while skirting their laws. But the real twist, some of the most illicit goods here weren't luxuries or weapons, they were everyday staples. Grain sacks with false bottoms hid extra rations from tax collectors. Jars labeled as cheap wine held finer vintages reserved for officers. Even the blacksmith scraps told a story. Slag piles showed traces of higher quality ores than officially recorded, suggesting under-the-table upgrades for paying clients. This wasn't just cheating, it was survival. When armies requisitioned supplies at fixed prices, merchants found ways to recoup losses through hidden markups. Yet calling this a pure black market oversimplifies things. A fragment of a clay tablet lists deliveries to a military quartermaster, complete with official seals, proof that some trade here was sanctioned. The same stall that sold untaxed spices might also distribute state-issued rations. This duality reveals an uncomfortable truth. Many ancient rulers quietly tolerated such grey markets because they stabilized volatile frontiers. A general could publicly decry smugglers while privately relying on them to feed his troops during sieges. The marketplace's most revealing artifact. A broken ledger with two sets of accounts, one in neat script for inspectors, another in cryptic symbols tracking real transactions. It's a physical testament to the dance between law and necessity. For the farmers, metalworkers, and traders who passed through here, legality wasn't an absolute. It was a shifting line, redrawn with each season's harvest and each turn of the war. And in that fluid space, they built an economy that kept armies moving, empires standing, and history unfolding, one covert deal at a time. The line between legal and illegal trade in wartime wasn't just blurred, it was often deliberately smudged by the very rulers who claimed to enforce it. Consider the Roman emperor who publicly condemned smugglers while his generals quietly bought their goods, or the Persian satrap who collected taxes by day and profited from untaxed caravans by night. This marketplace, buried beneath the battlefield, might have been no different. Its very existence suggests a shadow economy where rules bent to the needs of war, and where those in power often winked at the very laws they wrote. Take the case of the bronze weights discovered here, some stamped with official seals, others crudely altered to tip the scales in a merchant's favor. Were these the tools of rogue traders, or evidence of a system where authorities turned a blind eye for a price? Ancient ledgers from other war zones offer clues. In one account, a governor's scribe notes payments from merchants labeled not as taxes, but as gifts, suggesting a veneer of legality over what was essentially a bribe. Another tablet found near the Euphrates lists shipments of grain lost to bandits, a convenient fiction when the same grain later appears in army storerooms. If this marketplace operated similarly, its destruction might not have been about justice but about covering tracks. Yet there's another possibility. This hub wasn't just tolerated, it was orchestrated. Think of medieval siege camps where rulers allowed forbidden markets to flourish outside city walls, knowing their armies needed supplies no official channels could provide. A fragment of pottery from this site bears the faint scratch marks of a tally, one side recording sacks of flour delivered to troops, the other noting silver paid to a mysterious overseer. Was this a rogue operation or proof that someone high up kept this place running off the books? The answer might lie in the artifacts that didn't survive. If ledgers were burned or seals melted down, it wouldn't be the first time history was rewritten by fire. The real shock comes when we compare this marketplace to others across the ancient world. In Egypt, a papyrus scroll details how a pharaoh's tax collectors split their take with desert traders, pretending not to see their smuggled goods. In China, Han Dynasty records speak of military outposts that officially banned private trade while officers quietly profited from it. This pattern suggests something bigger than corruption. It reveals a silent understanding that war couldn't be waged on rulebooks alone. Armies needed flexibility, and rulers needed deniability. So when the fighting ended, places like this marketplace didn't just disappear. They were erased, their existence scrubbed from records to preserve the myth of absolute control. But here's what the rulers missed: the artifacts they couldn't destroy. A single coin minted by a rebel faction tucked into a crack in the wall. A scrap of cloth dyed with a forbidden pigment hidden in a jar. These fragments tell us that for all the power of kings and generals, they never fully controlled the flow of goods or the people who traded them. And that's the ultimate irony of this marketplace. Buried to hide its truth, it became a time capsule of the very system it was meant to conceal. Who really pulled the strings behind this bustling wartime marketplace? The answer might lie in a handful of coins unearthed near the market's central plaza, each stamped with the profile of a king whose palace stood hundreds of miles away. At first glance, this seems like proof of direct royal control, but dig deeper and the story gets murkier. Those coins weren't just currency, they were propaganda, their pristine condition suggesting they'd been freshly minted and distributed to buy loyalty from local garrisons. Yet right beside them, archaeologists found crudely made counterfeits, some even bearing the same ruler's face, but with the nose deliberately chiseled off. This wasn't just forgery, it was silent rebellion. The inscriptions tell an even more tangled tale. A broken stone slab near the marketplace's entrance bears the remnants of a decree, its words chiseled in the formal language of the royal court. It promises fair trade under the king's protection, but the fine print reveals a different reality. Taxes listed are twice what merchants paid elsewhere, with exemptions granted only to traders bearing sealed passes from the capital. Were these passes rewards for loyalty or bribes dressed up as policy? A stash of clay tablets found buried beneath a merchant's stall holds the receipts literally. One records a payment of silver to a keeper of the seals, a shadowy figure who just happened to be the brother-in-law of the regional governor. Yet for all the top-down control, the marketplace had a life of its own. A set of leather scrolls preserved by chance in a collapsed storeroom details months of transactions. At first, they follow the official rates, but as the war dragged on, the handwriting grows frantic, the numbers straying further from royal decrees. By the end, a single loaf of bread costs what a soldier's monthly wage should have been if anyone was still paying wages. This wasn't just inflation, it was a system spiraling beyond anyone's control. The king's face might have been on the coins, but the real power was shifting to whoever had food when others were starving. So where did the profits go? Look to the artifacts that shouldn't have been there. A shard of blue-green glass from a distant seaport, so rare it would have cost a fortune. A scrap of embroidered silk, its patterns matching those in royal tombs. These weren't goods for common soldiers or local farmers. They were luxuries smuggled in for elites who grew richer while their armies fought. Even the marketplace's layout hints at this divide. The finest stalls stood closest to the garrison, their walls reinforced with stone while others made do with flimsy wood. But the most damning evidence isn't in the grand treasures. It's in the small, quiet finds. A child's skeleton buried just outside the market, its ribs showing the telltale marks of starvation. A potter's tablet pleading for grain, his family's ration cut in half after he couldn't pay a sudden storage fee. These aren't just artifacts, they're indictments. The rulers who profited from this marketplace didn't just manipulate trade, they weaponized scarcity, turning hunger into another tool of control. And when the war ended and the market was buried, it wasn't just to hide the evidence of their dealings. It was to erase the voices of those who paid the price. For the farmer sweating under the midday sun, dumping his last sack of grain onto a merchant's scale, this marketplace wasn't about empires or strategies. It was about the gnawing hunger of his children. The coins he received bought less each week, but refusing to sell wasn't an option. Soldiers took what they needed either way, paying with promises or threats. Yet this same market could also be his salvation. A blacksmith's daughter might trade a forged knife for a jug of milk, bypassing the broken economy altogether. That's the cruel paradox of war. The very system that bled these people dry was also the only thread keeping them alive. Craftsmen faced their own impossible choices. A leather worker stitching belts for cavalry officers knew his work helped extend the conflict, but turning down the commission meant his family wouldn't eat. Pottery shards from the site show how some artisans adapted. Urns originally made for grain were repurposed as helmets, their rims lined with padding. Others revealed desperation, a ceramic bowl crudely repaired with lead clamps, its owner unable to afford a replacement. These weren't just objects, they were stopgaps in a collapsing world. Women navigated even sharper dilemmas. Scroll fragments tell of widows bartering woven cloth for safe passage, or mothers selling heirloom jewelry to buy medicine for feverish children. A single child's sandal found wedged beneath a stall hints at darker stories, perhaps dropped in a scramble to flee press gangs snatching laborers. Yet there were also moments of defiance. Archaeologists uncovered a stash of seeds hidden beneath a millstone, likely hoarded to replant fields after soldiers burned them. Others found prayer beads woven with knots matching those from distant villages, evidence that networks of solidarity stretched beyond the reach of armies. Compare this to modern war zones, and the echoes are chilling. Today's conflict markets still thrive on the same brutal calculus: inflated bread prices in besieged cities, mechanics repairing bullet-riddled trucks for rival factions, pharmacists trading antibiotics for information. The tools have changed, but the desperation remains. A Syrian baker in Aleppo once described bartering loaves for diesel fuel to keep his oven running, just as an ancient counterpart might have traded barley for charcoal. The difference: today's crises unfold under smartphone cameras, yet the world still struggles to break the cycle. What does this tell us? That wartime economies aren't anomalies, they're mirrors reflecting who holds power and who pays the price. The farmer weighing grain against his family's hunger in 2000 BC faced the same moral arithmetic as a father in Mariupol or Gaza today. Survival isn't just about enduring bullets, it's about navigating the invisible battlefield of scarcity, where every choice is a compromise and every transaction leaves someone holding the sharper end of the deal. The marketplace buried beneath that ancient battlefield wasn't just a relic, it was a warning. From the ancient marketplace buried beneath battlefields to the shadowy alleyways of modern war zones, one truth remains unchanged: wherever armies clash, trade adapts. Take Syria's wartime economy, where entire neighborhoods transformed into black market hubs overnight. Bakeries sold bread at 10 times the peacetime price, while smugglers charged exorbitant fees to ferry medicine through checkpoints. Sound familiar? It's the same story etched into those 2,000-year-old coins we found: scarcity driving prices, desperation fueling profit. Even the tactics mirror the past. Just as ancient merchants redirected grain shipments to the highest bidder, modern networks in Ukraine have funneled fuel and food across front lines, often with the tacit approval of officials on both sides. But the parallels run deeper than survival economics. Consider how trade routes become weapons. In ancient times, blocking access to salt or iron could cripple an enemy. Today, sieges like those in Mariupol or Aleppo follow the same playbook: cut off power, intercept aid convoys, and watch as civilian suffering becomes leverage. A scrap of parchment from our buried marketplace lists a warlord's order to halt all charcoal to the northern villages, a move straight out of a modern general's handbook. The tools have changed, but the strategy hasn't. Control the flow of goods, and you control the war. Yet there's a chilling twist. Ancient merchants at least faced physical limits. A cart could only carry so much, a mule could only walk so far. Today's black markets operate at digital speed. Cryptocurrencies fund arms deals in Yemen, while social media platforms become bazaars for everything from Kalashnikovs to fake passports. A first-century trader might have hidden spices in false-bottomed jars. Now, shipments are disguised in shipping containers with forged manifests, tracked by algorithms instead of star charts. The scale is global, but the game is the same. What does this mean for us? These cycles aren't inevitable, they're choices. When archaeologists uncovered that child's toy in the ruins, it humanized the cost of ancient profiteering. Today, footage of kids digging through rubble for scrap metal in Mosul does the same. The lesson isn't just that history repeats itself, it's that we've always had the power to break the cycle. After all, those ancient merchants who followed armies weren't faceless opportunists. They were people trying to survive, just like the baker in Damascus or the mechanic in Kharkiv. The real question isn't whether trade will outlast war, it's who will become in the process. Power has always worn two faces, one visible, the other hidden. The battlefield above might have been where kings claimed victory, but the marketplace below was where victory was truly bought. Think of it like this: a sword can win a skirmish, but the hand that controls the iron trade wins the war. This buried marketplace isn't just a relic, it's a blueprint. It shows us that real power wasn't measured in the size of an army, but in the ability to choke supply lines, to turn scarcity into leverage, to make gold flow where you needed it most. And here's the kicker: those who pulled the strings often preferred to stay in the shadows. Take the coins found here, stamped with the faces of distant rulers. At first glance, they're symbols of authority, but look closer. Many were clipped, shaved down by merchants skimming precious metal, a silent rebellion against the very powers that minted them. Others bore countermarks punched by local warlords to reassert control. This wasn't just currency, it was a tug of war over economic sovereignty, because whoever decided what money was worth, what goods cost, who got to trade, they held the real reins. And they didn't need a crown to do it. The marketplace's layout tells the same story. Stalls closest to the garrison were sturdy stone, their wares fine weapons, spices, wine reserved for officers. Further out, flimsy wooden stands sold meager rations to conscripts and locals. This wasn't an accident. It was hierarchy carved into the earth. The elite ate well, the desperate paid dearly, and the system ensured both stayed in their place. Yet even here, cracks appeared. Hidden compartments in merchant stalls held extra grain, unmarked jars of oil, proof that for every rule, someone found a workaround. Fast forward to today, and the parallels are unnerving. Modern sanctions, they're just sieges by another name, starving economies to bend political wills. Black markets in conflict zones, same survival tactics, now with cryptocurrencies instead of clipped coins. Even the way corporations lobby governments echoes those ancient merchants whispering in generals' ears. The players have changed, but the game hasn't. Because power still thrives where resources flow, whether that's oil pipelines or silicon chips. But here's what the ruins scream loudest. History loves to glorify conquerors while erasing the brokers who made conquest possible. The scribes recorded battles, not the price of the swords. Yet every empire that fell did so first in its markets, when inflation hollowed out armies, when trade routes snapped, when the people who kept the system running finally broke. That's why this marketplace matters. It's not just a lesson about the past. It's a warning about the quiet forces shaping our present and who's really pulling the strings behind the scenes. The echoes of that ancient marketplace ripple through every modern conflict, proving that economic warfare isn't a new strategy, it's humanity's oldest playbook. Look at today's sanctions, those carefully crafted financial sieges designed to cripple nations without firing a shot. They're the direct descendants of the warlord who hoarded salt or the emperor who taxed iron into scarcity. The tools have evolved: blockchains instead of clay tablets, algorithms tracking shipments instead of scribes. But the goal remains unchanged. Control the flow of resources, and you control the fate of empires. Yet there's a crucial difference between then and now. In antiquity, a merchant might spend weeks dodging bandits to smuggle a load of grain. Today, a single keystroke can divert billions in assets or freeze a nation's central bank reserves. That speed and scale magnify both the power and the peril. When ancient rulers squeezed a marketplace, the effects were localized. Today's economic shocks reverberate globally, collapsing currencies thousands of miles from the conflict zone. A farmer in Yemen starves because of decisions made in air-conditioned offices halfway across the world, just as that ancient trader watched his livelihood vanish when a distant king raised tariffs. But here's what the buried marketplace teaches us. Resilience is just as timeless as exploitation. For every sanction, there's a shadow network adapting. Cryptocurrencies bypass frozen accounts just as clipped coins once circumvented royal mints. Humanitarian aid moves through back channels, now as spices once did beneath the noses of tax collectors. Even in the darkest times, people rewrite the rules to survive. A child's toy buried in the ruins reminds us that behind every transaction, there's a human story, not just of survival, but of ingenuity. The unanswered questions linger like unbroken seals on long-lost contracts. How many of these hidden hubs remain undiscovered, their lessons still buried? What would their ledgers reveal about the unnamed brokers who shaped history? And perhaps most hauntingly, when future archaeologists sift through our own conflict zones, what will they find? Will they see our sanctions as sophisticated strategy or the same old hunger for control, dressed in new technology? The marketplace beneath the battlefield doesn't just connect us to the past. It holds up a mirror, forcing us to ask who we've become and who we might still be. For all the secrets this buried marketplace has surrendered, some truths remain stubbornly out of reach. Take the mystery of its destruction. Was it torched by retreating forces to deny resources to their enemies, or deliberately erased by victors rewriting history? The thick layers of ash suggest a single catastrophic fire, but scattered among the ruins are intact artifacts, as if some stalls were carefully emptied before the flames came. That selective destruction hints at something more calculated than the chaos of war. Perhaps certain merchants were warned, their loyalties rewarded with time to salvage their most valuable goods. Or maybe the fire was cover for looting, a way to disguise theft as inevitable wartime loss. Then there's the question of scale. If this marketplace thrived under the shadow of battle, how many others like it existed? Scrolls from a nearby temple mention the 5 markets of the Western Front, but archaeologists have only uncovered this one. Were the others obliterated more thoroughly, or do they still lie hidden beneath modern cities, their stories sealed under centuries of rubble? A fragment of a merchant's map, its edges charred, shows markings that could be trade routes or military supply lines. Without the full document, we're left guessing how far this shadow economy truly stretched. Some of the most tantalizing gaps lie in the untranslated artifacts. A set of lead scrolls coiled tight as springs bear inscriptions in a script that blends local symbols with unfamiliar characters. Are these encrypted accounts, spy reports, or even personal letters? One wax tablet, its surface melted but partially preserved, contains a list of names alongside sums of silver and cryptic symbols resembling astrological signs. Was this a payroll, a hit list, or something else entirely? Until linguists crack these codes, we're left with half a story, like hearing one side of a whispered conversation. The marketplace's influence on the war itself is another unsolved riddle. Ledgers show spikes in weapons sales before major battles, but was this cause or effect? Did arms dealers stoke conflicts to drive demand, or were they simply reacting to orders from commanders? A stash of arrowheads, all identical but found in camps of opposing factions, suggests some merchants supplied both sides, but we'll never know if they played factions against each other or just followed the money. Future excavations might fill these gaps. Ground-penetrating radar has already detected anomalies near the site. Could these be warehouses, barracks, or even another marketplace? New imaging techniques might reveal faded ink on those charred scrolls, while isotopic analysis of coins could trace their origins to unmapped mines. But history's deepest truths often resist even the sharpest tools. For every answer unearthed, a dozen new questions emerge, and that's the beauty of this discovery. It doesn't just tell us about the past. It reminds us how much we still have to learn. Archaeologists aren't done with this battlefield marketplace, not by a long shot. The next phase of excavation will stretch beyond the stalls and into the surrounding earth, where ground-penetrating radar has already detected strange, geometric shapes buried deeper still. Could these be the foundations of barracks where soldiers slept between battles, or storage pits where merchants stockpiled grain ahead of sieges? One pottery shard found at the edge of the site bears a crude sketch of what looks like a watchtower, hinting that this marketplace might have been part of a larger, fortified complex. Every shovel of dirt turned could rewrite what we know about how war and commerce intertwined. Technology is about to revolutionize this dig in ways its first discoverers couldn't have imagined. Teams are now feeding thousands of artifact images into AI systems trained to spot patterns invisible to the human eye. A coin dismissed as unremarkable might, under algorithmic scrutiny, reveals subtle wear marks tracing its path across 3 empires. Scraps of text too faded to read could be digitally enhanced, letter by letter, until they spill their secrets. Even the soil itself is being analyzed at a microscopic level. Pollen grains trapped in ancient mud can tell us what crops grew nearby, while traces of metal in the dust might lead us to long-lost forges. The past isn't just being uncovered, it's being decoded. Meanwhile, historians are scouring forgotten archives with fresh urgency. A single mention of this marketplace in a merchant's diary or a soldier's letter could answer questions that artifacts alone can't. One scholar recently cross-referenced a fragmentary scroll from a nearby monastery with accounts of a legendary battle. Turns out, the field of silver described in the text might not have been a poetic metaphor, but a reference to this very hub where coins changed hands like weapons. Other researchers are tracing genealogies, hoping to link names on recovered tablets to living descendants who might carry oral histories passed down through generations. But with every revelation comes a pressing question. How do we protect what's been found? The marketplace's fragile organic artifacts, textiles, seeds, wooden tools, are vulnerable to deterioration now that they've been exposed. Conservationists are experimenting with cutting-edge techniques, from nanoscale coatings that shield metal from rust to climate-controlled cases that mimic the stability of the earth that preserved these objects for centuries. Local communities are also stepping in, with schools near the site teaching children how to identify and report artifacts, turning the next generation into stewards of their own history. The greatest challenge isn't just uncovering the past, it's ensuring these discoveries don't become casualties of the present. Looters still target conflict zones, ancient and modern alike, stripping sites of priceless context for quick profits. Climate change threatens to desiccate or flood delicate ruins, and as political tensions simmer around the region, archaeologists race against time to document what they can before the sands shift again. This marketplace survived war, fire, and centuries of silence. Our task now is to make sure its story doesn't end with us. The moment this marketplace was unearthed, the clock started ticking. Exposure to modern air after centuries underground threatens to crumble delicate fabrics and fade fragile inks. Looters, drawn by the promise of coins and artifacts, have already left scars in the night, gaping holes where history was ripped away. But there's hope. Teams from universities across 3 continents are racing to stabilize the site, brushing preservatives onto ancient wood and sealing crumbling pottery with adhesives developed for space missions. Meanwhile, every artifact, from the grandest ledger to the tiniest seed, is being scanned in 3 dimensions, creating a digital twin of the marketplace that could outlast the physical remains. This isn't just about saving objects, it's about safeguarding stories. Take the charred ledger fragment listing grain shipments. In a lab in Berlin, multispectral imaging has revealed invisible ink beneath the soot, exposing a hidden column of payments to someone called the gatekeeper. Who was this shadowy figure? Without preservation, we might never know. Similarly, a child's leather shoe, stiff as stone when found, has been gently rehydrated to restore its flexibility, revealing stitch patterns that trace migration routes of nomadic tribes. These aren't just artifacts, they're keys to understanding how ordinary people navigated a world at war. Public fascination has become an unexpected ally. Crowdfunding campaigns to conserve the site's most fragile textiles, like a linen tunic still bearing the sweat stains of its long-dead wearer, have surpassed goals in hours. But with attention comes risk. Last year, drones spotted trespassers tunneling toward the marketplace's treasury district under cover of darkness. Now, thermal cameras and vibration sensors ring the site, a high-tech mode protecting the past. The dilemma: how to share this treasure with the world without loving it to death. Some answers may lie in places like Pompeii's mausoleum, where controlled visitor flows and climate-controlled display cases let the public walk through history without stealing its breath. Other ancient markets offer sobering lessons. The bazaars of Aleppo, some dating back millennia, were reduced to rubble in modern conflict, their artifacts scattered or smashed. By contrast, Istanbul's Grand Bazaar, continuously operating for over 5 centuries, thrives because generations recognized its value beyond commerce. The difference: stewardship. When Venetian merchants first nailed iron rings to the Grand Bazaar's columns to tether their mules, no one imagined those scratches would one day be protected under glass as historical artifacts. That shift from seeing places as useful to seeing them as irreplaceable is what's needed now. The race to save this marketplace isn't just about the past. It's about proving that we can break the cycle of loss that's defined so much of human history. because every time we preserve a fragment, whether it's a merchant's scale or a soldier's last letter home, we're not just keeping history alive. We're honoring the lives that history was built on and ensuring their voices aren't buried twice. Pompeii's mausoleum, its ancient market frozen in time by volcanic ash, offers a masterclass in how to protect fragile history. Unlike the battlefield marketplace, which was buried by deliberate destruction, Pompeii's ruins were preserved almost tenderly. Loaves of bread still sit in ovens, frescoes retain their vibrant colors, and the grooves of chariot wheels mark the stone streets. But the real lesson isn't just in the preservation. It's in how modern technology has made these spaces accessible without risking their survival. High-resolution 3D scans allow visitors to virtually walk those same streets, handling digital replicas of artifacts too delicate to touch. Imagine applying that to our battlefield marketplace, holding a reconstructed merchant's scale in augmented reality, watching as holographic traders barter over goods that crumbled to dust centuries ago. The success of Pompeii also hinges on something deeper: global collaboration. When conservators noticed its famed mosaics fading, experts from Japan shared nanotech coatings originally developed for delicate samurai armor. Italian researchers, in turn, taught others how to stabilize ancient plasters using techniques perfected in Renaissance workshops. This marketplace beneath the battlefield could benefit from the same exchange. Perhaps textile specialists from Peru, who have preserved Incan fabrics in high-altitude ruins, could help salvage the fragile linens found here. Metallurgists from Germany, skilled in halting corrosion on medieval relics, might unlock secrets in the blacksmith's rusted tools. History isn't owned by one nation, it's a puzzle best solved by many hands. Yet Pompeii's greatest gift might be its cautionary tales. Early excavations in the 18th century were rushed, damaging artifacts in the race for treasure. Some frescoes, exposed too quickly, flaked away before they could be studied. The battlefield marketplace must avoid these mistakes. Already, there's talk of slowing the dig, focusing first on non-invasive techniques like ground-penetrating radar and soil analysis. A single grain of pollen trapped in the tread of an ancient sandal could reveal what crops grew nearby, or even the season when the market fell. Rushing now would mean losing stories we haven't even thought to ask about. Interactive exhibits at sites like Ephesus in Turkey show another path forward. There, visitors don't just see reconstructed market stalls. They hear the clamor of haggling voices, smell the cumin and salt that once perfumed the air, even feel the texture of replicated coins. This kind of immersive storytelling could transform the battlefield marketplace from a collection of artifacts into a living, breathing space. Picture standing where a Roman soldier once bartered for boots, your smartphone overlaying the scene with the faces of merchants whose remains were found nearby, their DNA revealing origins from 3 continents. Suddenly, history isn't behind glass, it's standing shoulder to shoulder with you. But the challenge goes beyond technology. Pompeii's caretakers have spent decades balancing tourism with preservation, learning hard lessons about crowd control and climate management. The battlefield marketplace, smaller and more fragile, would need even stricter safeguards, maybe timed tickets like those at Sweden's Vasa Museum, where only small groups view the 17th century warship at once. Or climate-controlled viewing chambers, inspired by the Lascaux cave replicas that protect France's prehistoric art. The goal isn't to keep people out, it's to let them in without loving the site to death. All these threads, technology, collaboration, storytelling, tie together into one undeniable truth. Preserving this marketplace isn't just about saving the past. It's about redefining how we engage with history. The blackened timbers and scattered coins aren't relics. They're invitations to understand power, survival, and human ingenuity in ways no textbook can convey. When a child touches a 3D printed replica of that child's toy found in the ruins, they're not just learning about ancient commerce, they're feeling the echo of a life not so different from their own. And that connection, more than any artifact, is what makes the dust of centuries worth sifting through. The marketplace beneath the battlefield isn't just a relic of war, it's a mirror held up to humanity itself. On one hand, the swords and arrowheads speak of division, of borders drawn in blood. On the other, the coins and scales reveal something just as powerful: our endless capacity to connect, to barter, to find common ground even amid chaos. This duality isn't ancient history, it's woven into the fabric of who we are. The same instincts that drove a Roman soldier to trade his silver for a warm cloak still pulse through modern stock markets and global supply chains. Conflict and cooperation aren't opposites, they're twin forces, constantly reshaping the world. Look at how war bends trade, and trade bends war. In ancient times, a merchant might dodge raiders to deliver salt to both sides of a siege. Today, companies navigate sanctions and tariffs, finding loopholes in digital ledgers instead of desert trails. The players have changed, but the game hasn't. Even in the bloodiest conflicts, there's always someone brokering deals in the shadows, whether it's a medieval spice trader whispering to rival kings or a modern arms dealer accepting cryptocurrency. The battlefield marketplace reminds us that survival isn't just about strength. It's about adaptability, about knowing when to clash and when to collaborate. Yet for all the darkness, there's light here too. That child's toy buried in the rubble, it's proof that life persisted. The love letters hidden in jars. They're testaments to hope flickering even in wartime. These artifacts don't just show us how people endured, they show us why. Because beneath the grand narratives of empires and battles, humans have always clung to the ordinary. A meal shared, a gift bartered, a song hummed in the dark. These small acts of normalcy were rebellions against the chaos, reminders that war couldn't erase everything. So what does this mean for us today? The lesson isn't that history repeats itself, it's that we're still wrestling with the same fundamental choices. When we see economic sanctions used as weapons or black markets thriving in crisis zones, we're witnessing the same forces that shaped that ancient marketplace. The difference now is awareness. We can recognize these patterns, question who profits from division, and choose where to direct our own cooperation. The marketplace beneath the battlefield doesn't just teach us about the past, it challenges us to ask, in a world still torn between conflict and connection, which will we feed? The answer isn't in the artifacts we've uncovered, but in the ones we've yet to create. The marketplace beneath the battlefield isn't just a relic, it's a revelation. Every scorched ledger, every trampled coin whispers the same truth. Power doesn't just reside in crowns and conquests, but in the quiet exchange of goods. Think of the warlord who taxed salt to fund his campaigns, or the merchant who smuggled iron to the highest bidder. These weren't side stories to history, they were the hidden gears turning its wheels. Yet for all the manipulation and greed, there's another narrative woven into the artifacts: the unbreakable will of ordinary people to carve out normalcy amid chaos. A cook stirring a pot of lentils as armies clashed outside, a weaver trading cloth for a day's safety, a child clutching a toy dropped in flight. These moments remind us that humanity endures even when empires fall. What makes this discovery so urgent isn't just what it tells us about the past, but how it reframes our present. Modern sanctions, supply chain wars, even the black markets of today's conflict zones, they're all echoes of that ancient marketplace. The tools have changed, but the playbook remains startlingly familiar. Control the flow of resources, and you control the fate of nations. Yet there's a crucial difference now. We have the chance to learn from these ruins. When we see how easily trade became a weapon, how scarcity was engineered to break spirits, we're forced to ask who's pulling those strings today, and more importantly, how do we dismantle systems that still profit from desperation? The real treasure of this excavation isn't gold or artifacts, it's perspective. History loves to glorify kings and battles, but the marketplace forces us to reckon with the architects of everyday power. The scribe tallying debts in clay, the blacksmith reforging swords into plowshares, the widow bartering her last jar of honey, they shaped the world as much as any general. Their stories, preserved by chance in ash and earth, challenge us to look beyond textbooks and see history as it truly was, messy, human, and far more interconnected than we imagined. As the dig continues, new questions emerge with every layer uncovered. Why were some stalls meticulously emptied before the fire, while others lay untouched? What deals were struck in the shadow of the garrison walls? And if this marketplace thrived here, how many others lie forgotten beneath battlefields we've yet to explore? The search for answers isn't just academic, it's a race against time. Looters, erosion, even the very air that now touches these artifacts threaten to erase their stories before we can hear them. But with every fragment saved, every scan archived, we're stitching together a tapestry of resilience that spans millennia. Perhaps the greatest lesson of this marketplace is that nothing is ever truly buried. The past has a way of resurfacing, not as dust and bones, but as a mirror. When we study how ancient rulers weaponized trade, we see the blueprints of modern economic warfare. When we trace the paths of merchants who fed armies, we recognize the same networks that move goods across borders today. And when we hold that child's toy, smoothed by fingers long gone, we're reminded that behind every empire, every conflict, there were always people, laughing, grieving, bargaining, surviving. The marketplace under the battlefield doesn't just belong to archaeologists. It belongs to anyone who's ever bartered for a better future or dared to hope in the